What if life has no ultimate meaning? What if the universe does not owe us an answer? And what if, despite knowing that, we choose to live anyway? Few philosophers confronted these questions with greater courage than Albert Camus. He did not promise humanity a perfect world. He did not offer an easy path to happiness. Instead, he looked directly at suffering, death, loneliness, and meaninglessness, and asked a terrifying question. How should we live if life itself refuses to give us an answer? His name was Albert Camus, a writer, a philosopher, a journalist, and one of the most influential voices of 20th century thought. His ideas would become associated with the philosophy of the absurd. But Camus did not begin his life in a university. He did not grow up surrounded by wealth. His story began in poverty. Albert Camus was born on November 7, 1913, in Mondovi, French Algeria. His family belonged to a poor working-class community. His father, Lucien Camus, was a French agricultural worker, but Albert would barely know him. In 1914, shortly after the outbreak of the First World War, his father was sent to fight for France. He was killed at the Battle of the Marne. Albert was less than 1 year old. The boy would grow up without a father. His mother, Catherine, was left to raise her children alone. The family moved to Algiers and lived in a small apartment with very limited money. There was no luxury, no private library, no comfortable study. Yet Camus discovered something that would change his life: books. At school, one teacher recognized his intelligence. His name was Louis Germain. Germain encouraged the young Camus to continue his education. He saw potential in a boy whose circumstances might easily have limited his future. Camus never forgot him. Years later, when Camus received the Nobel Prize in Literature, he wrote to his former teacher and thanked him. For Camus, education was not simply a path to success. It was a form of freedom. But his childhood was also shaped by something else: the Mediterranean, the sunlight, the sea, the physical beauty of Algeria. Camus loved life in its most immediate form: swimming, football, walking beneath the sun, feeling the warmth of the Mediterranean. This is important because Camus was never simply a philosopher of despair. He loved life intensely, and that created a tension at the center of his philosophy. He knew that life was temporary, yet he believed that its temporary nature made it more precious. At the age of 17, Camus was diagnosed with tuberculosis. The illness interrupted his studies and forced him to confront his own mortality. For a young man, the discovery that death could arrive early was transformative. He could no longer treat life as something guaranteed. Every day became temporary. Every moment became fragile. This experience would remain beneath much of his later philosophy. Camus studied philosophy at the University of Algiers, but he was not interested in philosophy as an abstract academic exercise. He wanted to understand how ideas affected real human beings. How should a person live? How should we respond to suffering? Can morality exist without absolute certainty? And perhaps most importantly, how can we continue living when we know that death is inevitable? These questions would eventually lead him toward his most famous philosophical idea: the absurd. Camus believed that human beings naturally search for meaning. We want our lives to have purpose. We want suffering to have an explanation. We want the universe to tell us why we are here, but the universe remains silent. The conflict between our desperate need for meaning and the world's silence creates what Camus called the absurd, but he refused to respond to the absurd with despair. He rejected suicide as a solution, and he rejected the idea that we must invent comforting illusions simply to survive. Instead, he proposed something more difficult: revolt, to live fully, to recognize that life may have no ultimate answer and still choose to embrace it. These ideas would become the foundation of his most famous works. But before Camus became a world-famous writer, Europe was moving toward catastrophe. The Second World War was approaching, and Camus was about to discover that philosophy was not merely something to discuss. Sometimes it was something you had to live. The world Camus had known was beginning to disappear. Europe was entering the darkest period of the 20th century. In 1939, the Second World War began. Camus was living in Algeria, but the conflict would soon reach every part of his life. He became a journalist and began writing about poverty, injustice, and political oppression. He believed that writing should not exist only for entertainment. A writer had a responsibility to the world around him. When France fell to Nazi Germany in 1940, Camus moved to France. There, he became involved with the French resistance and secretly worked on the underground newspaper Combat. He wrote against tyranny while knowing that his words could put his life in danger. For Camus, this was not simply politics, it was a philosophical question. If the world is absurd, does that mean nothing matters? Camus answered no. The fact that life has no guaranteed meaning does not mean that everything is meaningless. Human beings can still choose. They can still resist injustice. They can still show compassion. They can still create meaning through the way they live. This idea became central to his philosophy. In 1942, Camus published one of his most famous works, The Stranger. Its protagonist, Mousseau, appears emotionally detached from the world around him. He refuses to pretend that he feels what society expects him to feel. Through Mousseau, Camus explored one of his deepest questions. What happens when a person refuses to live according to society's illusions? The same year, Camus published The Myth of Sisyphus. This philosophical essay became one of the defining works of 20th century thought. It begins with a disturbing question. There is only one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. If life has no ultimate meaning, why should anyone continue living? Camus did not believe the answer was to escape life. Instead, he proposed something far more difficult. We should accept the absurd. We should recognize that the universe may never provide the answers we want. And then, instead of surrendering, we should live more intensely. Camus compared humanity to Sisyphus, the figure from Greek mythology who was condemned to push a huge stone up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down again. The punishment had no end. The effort seemed completely pointless. Yet Camus transformed the story. He imagined Sisyphus becoming conscious of his situation. The moment Sisyphus accepts his reality and continues anyway, he becomes free. Camus famously concluded that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his life is easy, not because his suffering disappears, but because he refuses to surrender his existence to despair. This became the heart of Camus's philosophy. Life does not need to be perfect to be worth living. It does not need to have a cosmic explanation to contain beauty. Sometimes, meaning is found in the act of living itself. In friendship, in love, in sunlight, in art, in human connection, in the simple decision to continue. But Camus was not finished. In 1947, he published The Plague. The novel tells the story of a city devastated by an epidemic. On the surface, it is a story about disease, but beneath the story lies something much larger. The plague becomes a symbol of suffering, oppression, and the human condition. The characters cannot completely eliminate the disaster. They cannot guarantee victory, but they can choose how they respond. They can help one another. They can resist. They can remain human. For Camus, that was enough. He did not believe humanity needed certainty before acting morally. We do not need to know the ultimate meaning of existence before we choose compassion. We do not need guarantees before we fight injustice. We simply have to decide what kind of people we want to become. As his reputation grew, Camus became one of the most famous writers in Europe. In 1957, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature. He was only 43 years old. The poor boy from Algeria had become one of the most important writers of his generation. Yet fame did not solve his philosophical questions. If anything, his success made them more complicated. Camus continued to criticize political extremism. He opposed systems that sacrificed individual human beings for an imagined future. He believed that no political ideal was worth destroying human dignity. This position eventually created serious disagreements between Camus and other intellectuals of his generation, including Jean-Paul Sartre. Their friendship eventually collapsed, but Camus remained committed to his principles. He would rather stand alone than support an idea he believed was unjust. Then, in January 1960, tragedy arrived. Camus was traveling in a car driven by his publisher and friend, Michel Gallimard. The vehicle crashed near the town of Villeblevin in France. Camus was killed instantly. He was only 46 years old. The man who had spent his life thinking about death had died unexpectedly. In the middle of his life, he left behind unfinished work, unanswered questions, and a philosophy that would continue long after him. Albert Camus never claimed to have discovered the meaning of existence. Perhaps that was precisely the point. He believed we may never receive an answer from the universe, but we can still answer the universe with the way we live. We can love even though we will lose. We can create even though everything we create will eventually disappear. We can fight injustice even though we may never create a perfect world. And we can live fully even though death is waiting for every one of us. Camus understood something deeply uncomfortable. The certainty of death does not make life worthless. It makes every moment more precious. The sun becomes more beautiful because it will eventually set. A friendship becomes more valuable because it cannot last forever. And life becomes more urgent because it has an ending. Perhaps that is the final lesson of Albert Camus. We may never discover why we are here. We may never find an answer large enough to explain suffering, death, and existence. But we are here, and while we are here, we have a choice. We can surrender to the silence, or we can live We can create, we can love, we can resist, and we can face an absurd world without becoming an absurd human being. That was Camus's rebellion. Not the destruction of life, but the decision to embrace it. Not the discovery of a final meaning, but the courage to live without one. And perhaps, in the end, that is what freedom truly means.